I need to say up front that I still don't have a full explanation for what happened that night, and I've stopped trying to force one. I've told this story exactly twice out loud, once to my sister, once to a coworker who wouldn't let it go until I did. And both times I left something out because it sounded insane even to me. I'm not leaving it out here. My name's not important, but for context, I was 26 at the time, working as a mobile ultrasound tech, which meant I drove a company SUV full of imaging equipment between small clinics and nursing homes across the Southwest. Boring job, decent pay, way too much time alone on two-lane highways. In October of 2024, I got assigned a 2-week rotation covering clinics in northern New Mexico, which meant a lot of driving through nothing. High desert, mesas, the occasional gas station with a coyote skull nailed above the door like that's normal out there. I was heading from Flagstaff to Gallup, New Mexico, planning to hit a clinic in Gallup the next morning at 8 a.m. It's about a 3-hour drive if you don't stop, but I'd left late, around 6 p.m., because the scan ran long, and by the time I hit the New Mexico border, it was already fully dark, that flat, complete desert dark where your headlights are the only light for miles. I didn't want to keep driving after midnight, so around 9:40 p.m. I pulled off I-40 into Gallup, looking for somewhere cheap to crash. Gallup's a real place, if you've never heard of it. Old Route 66 town, a lot of history, a lot of motels that have been there since the 50s, the kind with the big vertical neon signs, half the letters burned out. I didn't want a chain hotel because I was trying to save my per diem, so I pulled into a single-story motor lodge just off historic 66, one of those horseshoe-shaped ones with the office in the middle and rooms wrapping around a gravel parking lot. I'm not going to use the real name of the place, partly because I don't want to cause trouble for whoever owns it now, and partly because I looked it up a year later and the name had changed, like it had been. The guy at the front desk was maybe 60, wearing a flannel even though it wasn't cold yet, watching a muted TV that was playing local news. He didn't ask for much. ID, card, said checkout was 11. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that they were pretty empty tonight, which I remember because it struck me as a weird thing to volunteer. I got room 14, at the far end of the horseshoe, facing the parking lot. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Thin maroon carpet, a bedspread with a pattern that was probably supposed to look southwestern but just looked stained, a window unit AC that rattled when I turned it on, and a bathroom with a fluorescent light that took a second to flicker to life. I remember there was a little paper strip across the toilet seat that said, "Sanitized for your protection," which felt like a joke considering the state of the grout. I dropped my bag on the bed, texted my sister something like, "Made it to Gallup, motel looks like a murder documentary set, we'll report back," and got in the shower. I want to be clear that up to this point, nothing was wrong. I wasn't scared. I was tired and a little bored, the way you get on a long solo work trip. I watched some show on my laptop. I think it was a rerun of some cooking competition, ate a granola bar because I hadn't eaten dinner, and was in bed by around 11:15. The first thing that felt off happened around 11:47 p.m., and I only know the time because I checked my phone right after. I heard someone in the room next to mine, room 13, moving furniture. Not loudly, not aggressively, just this steady dragging sound, like someone pulling a dresser or a nightstand a few inches across the floor, then stopping, then doing it again. It went on for maybe 10 minutes. I didn't think much of it. People rearrange motel rooms sometimes, especially if they're trying to block the door or move a chair to get to an outlet, whatever. I put in earbuds and fell asleep to a podcast. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. I know the exact time because it was the first thing I looked at, out of habit, the way you check your phone when something wakes you up and you want to know how much of the night you have left. What woke me up was the sound of my doorknob turning. Not knocking, not a key card, just the knob. Slowly, all the way to the right, and then stopping when it hit the lock. I sat up. My heart was going, but I told myself it was probably someone at the wrong room, drunk, confused, whatever. Motels get that. I said, "Wrong room," loud enough to be heard through the door. Nothing. No response, no footsteps walking away. Nothing. I sat there in the dark for what felt like a full minute, just listening, and I swear I could hear breathing on the other side of the door. Slow, not panicked, not drunk sounding, just steady breathing, like someone standing there on purpose. Then I heard it move away. Not fast, not running, just unhurried footsteps on gravel, heading toward the parking lot. I got up and checked the deadbolt and the little brass latch, both of which were engaged, so I hadn't imagined locking the door. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing but the parking lot lit up orange under one of those old sodium lights, my SUV, and beyond that the highway. No cars idling that I could see. I stood there for a while, maybe 5 minutes, before I convinced myself to get back in bed, but I left the bathroom light on with the door cracked, which is something I didn't sleep well after that. But I did eventually doze off, and the next thing that woke me was worse. Around 3:30 a.m., I didn't check the exact time until after, So I'm estimating based on when I fell back asleep and how long it felt. I heard the dragging sound again from room 13, except this time it was different. It wasn't furniture. It was slower, heavier, and it was accompanied by a sound I can only describe as someone's shoe scraping and catching, over and over, like a limp, or like someone was being pulled and their heel was dragging along the floor. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I'm reaching for the most dramatic explanation, but I want to describe exactly what it was, because at the time, lying there in the dark, my brain went through about 6 mundane explanations before it landed anywhere dark. Maybe someone was moving a mattress, maybe someone was drunk and stumbling, maybe there was a dog. I actually remember thinking, maybe there's a dog, because the sound had a kind of rhythm to it that could have been an animal's nails. Then it stopped. And about 30 seconds later, I heard very clearly through the wall, not muffled, not distant, right up against the drywall like someone was standing with their back to it, a man's voice say something. I couldn't make out most of it. I did not sleep again that night. I sat up with the lamp on, my phone in my hand, seriously considering calling the front desk, and then seriously considering just leaving and driving somewhere else at 4 in the morning. What stopped me from doing either was pure exhaustion and a kind of frozen, stupid paralysis you get at that hour where every option feels equally unsafe. Leaving the room felt unsafe, staying felt unsafe, calling attention to myself felt unsafe. I just sat there with my back against the headboard, watching the door, until the sky started turning gray around 6. At 6:40, I packed my bag as fast as I could, and when I stepped outside, the parking lot looked completely normal in that thin gray morning light. Nothing dramatic, no crime scene, no obvious explanation for anything. I glanced at room 13's window on my way to the SUV. The curtains were drawn, but there was a gap of maybe 2 inches where they didn't quite meet, and even though I didn't want to, I looked. I couldn't see much. A shape I told myself was a chair, a dark smear low on the wall near the floor that could have been a shadow, could have been a stain, could have been nothing. The light was bad and I was already walking, already telling myself not to stop and stare at a stranger's window like a lunatic. What I want to focus on, though, is what happened at the front desk, because this is the part that still bothers me the most. I went in to return my key, and it was a different guy working, younger, maybe early 30s, and I asked him, trying to sound casual, trying to sound like I was just making conversation, whether room 13 was occupied last night. He looked at a screen for a second and said, "Room 13's not in service." I said something like, "Are you sure? I heard someone in there most of the night." And he looked at me for a second with an expression I can only describe as careful, like he was deciding how much to say, and then he said, "That room's had some plumbing issues." I asked if I could see it, which in hindsight was a strange thing to ask, but I think some part of me needed to see an empty room and feel stupid, needed the mundane explanation. He said it was locked, and he didn't have a reason to open it for a guest who'd already checked out. I didn't push. I took my receipt and left, and I remember sitting in my SUV in the parking lot for a solid 10 minutes before I could make myself drive, just staring at the door of room 13 from a distance, half expecting the curtain to move. It didn't. By that afternoon, I'd mostly talked myself into some rational version of events. A maintenance guy working a late shift in an empty room, someone testing a door at the wrong room by accident, a TV I misheard through thin walls. I wanted that version to be true badly enough that I almost believed it. Then, about 4 months later, in February 2025, I was back in Gallup for a different rotation, and out of a curiosity I couldn't quite kill, I drove past that motel. It had a new sign. Different name, fresh paint on the office, one of those extended stay banners hanging off the fence. I pulled in, told myself I was just going to ask a quick question, and talked to a woman at the desk who'd clearly worked there a while, judging by how comfortable she was. I asked as casually as I could manage if the place had changed ownership recently. She said yes, new owners took over around December. I asked why, fishing, and she gave me a look, not suspicious of me exactly, more like she was surprised I was asking, and said something like, there was some stuff that happened before they took over. When I asked what kind of stuff, she said she didn't really know the details, just that a room had been closed off for a long time before the new owners gutted it and redid it, and that some of the old staff didn't want to talk about it. I didn't ask which room number. And I didn't because some part of me didn't want the confirmation, didn't want a real answer that would turn a bad night into something I couldn't rationalize anymore. I got back in my SUV and drove to my clinic appointment and didn't go back. Here's what still bothers me, the detail I've never been able to shake or explain. About 2 weeks after that first night in Gallup, back home, I was doing laundry and found a receipt in my jacket pocket from a gas station in Thoreau, New Mexico, which is a small town about 20 miles east of Gallup on I-40. I don't remember stopping there. I have no memory of that gas station at all, and the timestamp on the receipt is 4:52 a.m., the same morning I was in that motel room, sitting up with the lamp on, absolutely certain I never left the room until 6:47, paid in cash, and I don't carry cash, or at least I didn't back then. I still have it. I keep it in a drawer, and every so often I take it out and stare at it like it's going to explain itself, and it never does. I don't drive through Gallup anymore if I can route around it. When work sends me that direction, I take the longer way through Flagstaff and down through Holbrook instead, even though it adds 40 minutes. I've told myself it's just superstition, that a bad night in a cheap motel doesn't mean anything, that noises through motel walls are the most normal thing. But I still sleep with a light on when I'm somewhere unfamiliar. And I still check hotel door locks 2, sometimes 3 times before I can fall asleep. And I never ever ask the front desk about the room next to mine again. Because some part of me is afraid of what they might tell me. And a bigger part of me is afraid of what they might not. Story 2. The woman who wasn't checking out. I still work overnight, which is probably part of why this one got to me the way it did. I already knew what it felt like to be the only person awake in a building. But knowing that feeling from a hospital hallway and knowing it from a motel parking lot at 3 a.m. turned out to be two very different things. I was 29 at the time, a night shift ER nurse in Reno, Nevada. This was the summer of 2023. My mom had a health scare back in her hometown of Susanville, California, which is about 2.5 hours northwest of Reno, up through Highway 395, a long, empty stretch of 2-lane road that cuts through high desert and pine forest, past Honey Lake, past a lot of nothing. I'd been working back-to-back 12-hour shifts and hadn't slept properly in almost 2 days when I got the call that she'd been taken to the hospital, so I threw some clothes in a bag and started driving up 395 around 9 p.m., running on adrenaline and gas station energy drinks. By the time I got to Susanville, it was almost midnight, and my mom, it turned out, was stable, a bad reaction to a new blood pressure medication, scary but not life-threatening, and by the time I got to the hospital, she was already joking with the nurses, which told me everything I needed to know. I sat with her for a couple hours, talked to my stepdad, and by 2 a.m. I was exhausted in the specific way where your eyes burn and the world gets a little unreal at the edges. My stepdad offered me the couch, but their place was small and I didn't want to intrude, so I told them I'd just grab a motel for a few hours and head back to Reno in the morning. I found a place just off Main Street, one of those long single-story motels that's probably been there since the highway was built. The kind of place that still advertises color TV on its sign, like that's a selling point in 2023. I checked in around 2:20 a.m. The night clerk was an older woman, maybe 70s, who didn't ask any questions beyond my card and plate number, which I appreciated at the time and think about differently now. My room was room 6, near the middle of the building, facing the parking lot, the second to last one before an ice machine that hummed loud enough to hear through my window. I remember the room smelled like an air freshener trying too hard to cover cigarette smoke. And there was a chair by the window with a floral cushion that had a burn mark on one corner. I didn't care. I was asleep within 10 minutes of locking the door, still in my clothes, on top of the covers. I woke up at 4:41 a.m. to knocking. Not aggressive knocking, almost polite. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks again. At 4:41 in the morning, that detail didn't fully register with me until later. In the moment, half asleep, my brain just processed housekeeping as a normal, harmless word and moved on. I said something like, "I'm still sleeping, I'm good." And I heard her say, "Okay, sorry, hon." And then footsteps moving away down the walkway. I fell back asleep pretty quickly, honestly, because I was that tired. But about 40 minutes later, I checked. It was 5:26 a.m. I woke up again to the same 3-knock pattern, except this time it was at the window, not the door. The curtains were the heavy kind, blackout material, fully closed, and I remember lying there staring at them, waiting to see if they'd move, if there'd be a shadow, anything. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 knocks. I didn't answer this time. That's the part I still can't explain in any comfortable way. A housekeeper checking in on a guest is normal. 2 visits in under an hour at 5 in the morning is not. A housekeeper knocking on a covered window instead of the door that's 6 feet away is not normal either. There was no reason for her to even be at the window, no walkway on that side that I was aware of, just a narrow strip of gravel between the building and a chain-link fence. I sat up. My phone was at 8% battery, plugged into the charger I'd brought, and I remember staring at the little lightning bolt icon like it mattered, like it was going to help me. I said loud enough to Carrie, "I'm fine, I don't need anything." And there was a long silence, and then I heard footsteps again, except this time they didn't fade toward the office. They went the other direction, toward the back of the building, toward the ice machine, and beyond that, nothing. Just a dark field and the tree line. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lamp on, and around 6 a.m., once there was enough gray light coming through the curtain seam that I felt like the world was rejoining me, I got up, got dressed, and decided I'd rather sit in my car in a hospital parking lot than stay in that room one more minute. When I opened my door to leave, there was a folded slip of paper on the ground just outside, half tucked under the frame. I almost didn't pick it up. Some instinct told me not to touch it, but I did anyway because I needed to know. It was a Motel notepad page, the kind with the faded logo at the top, and on it, in blocky handwriting, was written, "Sorry to bother you." And under that, in the same handwriting but slightly smaller, like it was added after, "He said you didn't answer either." I stood there in the doorway rereading it probably 10 times, trying to make it mean something normal, a prank, a wrong room, a note meant for someone else. But the "he said" part is what I couldn't shake because it implied a conversation I wasn't part of, about me, and it implied there'd been someone else, a he, who had also not answered a door. I went straight to the office. The same older woman from check-in was still there, or maybe she'd never left, and I asked her, trying to keep my voice even, if housekeeping had come by my room overnight. She looked at me like I'd asked something slightly absurd and said, "We don't run housekeeping until 9, hun." I told her someone had knocked, twice, once at the window, and identified themselves as housekeeping, and I watched her face change. Not dramatically, just a kind of tightening around the eyes, the look of someone recalculating what she was willing to say. She asked which room I was in. I told her room 6. She was quiet for a second and then said, in a tone that was trying hard to sound casual and wasn't quite managing it, "We had someone leave real sudden out of that room a while back, middle of the night, left half their stuff." She said, "Insurance stuff, owner things." I said no. She nodded like that was the right answer, like it mattered, and didn't say anything else. I paid for the extra time I'd used past checkout, which she didn't even charge me for, actually. She waved it off, and I left the note on the counter, sliding it toward her, and asked if she knew whose handwriting it was. She looked at it for a long moment, longer than it should have taken to just glance at a few words, and said, "That's not any of our stationery style." Which meant, if she was telling the truth, that whoever wrote that note either had old Motel stationery from years prior, or it wasn't Motel stationery at all and just looked like. I drove back to Reno that morning running on fumes, and I didn't tell my mom or my stepdad any of this, because I didn't want them worrying about me on top of everything else. I told my coworkers a watered-down version a few days later at the hospital during a slow patch on a night shift, and one of the older nurses, a guy named Dennis who'd worked ER for almost 20 years and had heard every version of every strange story a person could tell, got quiet in a way that surprised me. He said Susanville, and that stretch of 395, had a reputation among some of the older EMS crews for missing persons cases going back decades. Hikers, a couple of hitchhikers in the 80s, nothing recent that he could point to specifically, just a vague secondhand sense that people disappeared in that stretch of California more than you'd expect for how small the population was. He wasn't telling me it was connected. He was just telling me it existed, this quiet local unease, the kind of thing that doesn't make the news but gets passed around in break rooms. I looked up the motel about a year later, in the summer of 2024, mostly out of that same compulsive need to check on something I couldn't explain. It was still open, same name, same sign. I didn't call, I didn't go back, but I did find an old review, buried a couple pages deep, from 2019, a full 4 years before my stay, from someone who'd left 1 star and written a single line. "Don't answer if housekeeping knocks at night." No further explanation, no follow-up, just that, sitting there with a handful of upvotes and 0 replies, like everyone who read it either didn't believe it or already understood. Because it means, if any of it was real in the way I'm afraid it was real, that I wasn't the first person that night to be tested at that door. And I've never been able to stop wondering who the first person was, and whether they made it back to their car the way I did. I don't take Highway 395 anymore if I can help it. When I visit my mom now, I go the long way through Truckee and down through Quincy, even though it adds almost an hour, because somewhere around the halfway point on 395, right around where the road straightens out near Honey Lake, I start watching my mirrors more than the road ahead, and I've never been able to explain that to anyone in a way that doesn't sound like I've lost my mind a little. Maybe I have. But I still keep my phone charged past 50% on any drive-through there, just in case. And I still haven't figured out what "just in case" is supposed to mean. Story 3. The man in the parking lot. I want to start by saying I'm not a nervous person by nature. I did 2 years as a long-haul trucker before I switched to local delivery routes. And you don't last long in that job if you spook easily. You sleep in truck stops, you deal with strange people at 3 a.m. gas stations, you get used to being alone in places that aren't really built for comfort. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that what happened to me outside a motel in Barstow, California, in the spring of 2025, wasn't me overreacting to something ordinary. I've replayed it enough times to be sure of that much, even if I'm not sure of anything else. I was 33, driving a regional route for a produce distributor, running loads between the Inland Empire and Las Vegas, which meant I spent a lot of nights in Barstow, since it sits almost exactly at the halfway point on I-15. Barstow's a real place if you've never been. High desert town, a lot of truck stops, a Route 66 museum, and a long strip of aging motels along East Main Street that have been serving truckers and road trippers since the 50s. I usually stayed at the same one, a low U-shaped place with a gravel lot big enough for rigs to park along the side, because the owner, a guy named Ray, gave regulars a discounted weekly rate and didn't ask questions if you rolled in. This particular night, I got in around 11:15 p.m. after a longer day than usual. A mechanical delay outside Victorville had put me 2 hours behind schedule. I remember it was warm even that late, close to 80 degrees, with that dry wind Barstow gets that makes everything smell like hot asphalt and creosote. I parked my truck along the side lot, checked in with Ray, who was watching a baseball game on a small TV behind the counter, and got my usual room, 22, at the far end near where the truck's parked, which I liked because I could see my rig from the window. I showered, ate a sandwich I'd bought at a gas station, and was in bed with the TV on low by around midnight. Nothing felt wrong. I want to be clear about that because a lot of these stories build up a sense of dread from the very first minute, and mine didn't. The first 4 hours were completely unremarkable. I actually fell asleep pretty easily, tired from the long day. I woke up at 2:56 a.m. to the sound of my truck's alarm going off. Not the loud siren kind, the softer chirping alert that means someone's tried the door handle or leaned against it hard enough to trip the sensor. I sat up immediately because that truck and its contents were my responsibility, and losing cargo or having someone mess with the rig was a real financial threat, not just an inconvenience. I went to the window and pulled the curtain back maybe 2 inches. There was a man standing next to my truck, not trying the door, not doing anything obviously criminal, just standing there, close to the driver's side, facing the truck, completely still. He was wearing a dark jacket despite the warm night, hood up, and even from that distance and in that bad orange parking lot light, something about how still he was standing made my stomach drop in a way I couldn't articulate at the time. People who are up to something usually move with purpose. Check a handle, look around, walk away. He was just standing there, like he was waiting for something or listening. The second I opened my door, he turned his head toward me. Not his whole body, just his head, slow, like it wasn't connected to any hurry at all. Trying to sound authoritative, the way you're supposed to when you're a 200-pound guy confronting a stranger near your own truck at 3 a.m. He didn't answer. He just looked at me for a few seconds. I couldn't see his face clearly. The hood and the bad lighting made sure of that. And then he turned and started walking, unhurried, along the side of the building, past room 20, past room 21, right past my window and around the corner toward the back of the motel, where there was nothing but a chain-link fence and a dry wash that ran along the edge of the property. I checked my truck. Nothing was disturbed, no obvious tamper marks, cargo doors still locked. I went back to Ray at the front desk. He worked overnight most nights, which was one of the reasons I liked staying there, and told him what happened. Ray didn't seem alarmed exactly, but he got a specific look on his face, the look of someone filing new information into an existing mental folder. He said, "Did he have a limp?" I went back to my room, but I didn't really sleep. I sat by the window with the lamp off so I could see out without being obviously visible from outside, watching the lot, watching my truck. Around 3:40 a.m., I saw him again. Same jacket, same hood, standing now near the ice machine between rooms 18 and 19, in the same stance, not doing anything, just standing, facing the building, facing the rooms, not moving. I want to describe what happened next as precisely as I can, because it's the part I've gone back and forth on the most. I watched him for probably a full 2 minutes, and at some point during that stretch, without him seeming to walk or reposition in any way I consciously registered, he was closer. Not dramatically closer, maybe 20 feet, maybe 30, but close enough that the change was unmistakable, and I have no memory of him crossing that distance. 1 second, he was by the ice machine. The next time I focused on him, he was near room 20, 2 doors down from mine, facing my window directly. I stepped back from the curtain so fast I knocked over a lamp. I'm not ashamed to say that. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed frame, phone in hand, seriously considering calling 911 and trying to explain what exactly. A man standing in a parking lot, which isn't a crime, isn't even unusual at a motel that caters to truckers and late travelers. I didn't call. I just sat there, listening, for what felt like an hour but was probably 20 minutes waiting for a knock that never came. At 4:22 a.m., I heard something scrape against my door. Not a knock, more like fingernails or a key dragged slowly across the surface, a long single scratch from about hip height, moving downward. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, really. It happened once. And then there was nothing, no footsteps, no further sound, just silence that somehow felt worse than the noise had. I stayed on that floor until it started getting light out, around 5:45. When I finally worked up the nerve to open the door, there was nothing there. No mark on the wood that I could find in daylight, nothing on the ground, no sign anyone had been there at all except for a single cigarette butt near the base of the door frame that I was fairly sure hadn't been there when I checked in. I told Ray everything again in the morning, in more detail this time, and this time he was more forthcoming. Maybe because it was daylight, maybe because 2 encounters in one night was enough to make even him take it seriously. He told me that over the years, he'd owned the place since the late 90s. There'd been a handful of complaints from truckers about a guy in a hoodie hanging around the lot at night. Never causing obvious trouble, never actually caught doing anything you could call the police over, but persistent enough that it had become a kind of open secret among the regulars. He said one driver, years back, had reported the guy standing directly outside his truck's driver door for over an hour, just standing, and had refused to ever stay there again. I kept staying at that motel for a few more months out of pure logistical necessity. It was still the best located option on my route, but I started parking my truck directly outside my room window instead of in the side lot, and I stopped taking room 22 specifically, asking instead for anything closer to the office, closer to Ray, closer to light. I never saw the man again after that night, not directly, though there were 2 or 3 occasions over the following months where I woke up around 3 or 4 a.m. for no clear reason, certain, not suspecting, certain, that someone was standing just outside, and I never once had the nerve to check the window to find out if I was right. The detail that still bothers me, the one I've never been able to shake, isn't the man himself. It's the cigarette butt. I don't smoke. I've never smoked. And in all my months of staying at motels like that one, I've never once seen anyone smoking near my door before or since. It sat there on the concrete outside room 22 the entire time I stayed, because I never picked it up. Like some part of me didn't want to touch it, didn't want to disturb whatever it meant. And eventually housekeeping must have swept it away along with everything else. Because one week, it was just gone. And nobody ever mentioned it. And I never asked. I don't run that Barstow route as often anymore. The company shifted some of us to different lanes about a year ago, and I didn't fight the reassignment even though it meant a small pay cut. When I do end up passing through on I-15 now, I don't stop. I fill up at whatever gas station has the shortest line, and I keep driving, even if it means getting into Vegas running on fumes and exhaustion, because there's a version of tired I can manage, and there's a version of afraid that I still haven't found a way to talk myself out of, even a year later, even in broad daylight, even now. Story 4, room 214. I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma in the fall of 2023 for a job as a claims adjuster, which meant a lot of driving to look at damaged property, hailstorm roofs, flooded basements, the occasional house fire. I was 27, single, still learning the layout of a city I didn't grow up in, and that November, a bad ice storm knocked out power across half the metro area for almost a week. My apartment was in one of the areas hit hardest, and after 2 nights without heat, huddled under every blanket I owned, I finally gave up and booked a motel that still had power, out along Route 66 near the old Tulsa Strip, a stretch of Southwest Boulevard that still has some of those mid-century motor courts from back when Route 66 ran straight through downtown. The place I found was a 2-story motel, the kind with exterior walkways and metal railings, ice still clinging to the railings when I pulled in around 8 p.m. I remember the parking lot lights buzzing, that particular hum you get from old sodium bulbs in cold weather, and my breath fogging in front of my face as I hauled my bag from the car to the office. The clerk, a tired-looking guy in his 40s, told me they were nearly full because half the motels in that part of town were doing the same business I was there for, people escaping the outage. He gave me room 214, second floor, said the elevator was out, apologized for the stay. The room itself was fine, unremarkable. 2 queen beds, a heater that clanked when it kicked on, a window overlooking the parking lot, and, beyond it, the boulevard, still eerily dark in both directions from the outage. I remember being grateful just for the warmth. I ordered a pizza, ate half of it, watched local news coverage of the storm damage, and was asleep by around 11. I woke up at 1:52 a.m. to the sound of someone crying in the room next to mine, room 212. Not loud, not screaming, just quiet, steady crying. A woman's voice, the kind of crying that sounds like it's been going on a while and has worn itself into something almost rhythmic. I lay there for a few minutes, not sure what to do. It's an awful, awkward feeling, hearing a stranger in real distress through a motel wall. You don't know if you should knock and check on them, if that would be a violation, if they'd even want a stranger involved, or if it's none of your business at all. After about 10 minutes of it, I got up, put on a sweatshirt, and knocked gently on the wall, just to signal I could hear her, and that maybe she'd want to know that in case she needed help. The crying stopped almost instantly, like a switch had been flipped. I didn't know what to do with that. There was no answer. I stood there for a solid minute, and then I heard footsteps in her room. Heavy, deliberate, a man's gait based on the sound. Crossed the floor, and then nothing. No talking, just silence. I went back to bed, but didn't really sleep, checking my phone every so often, and around 2:40 a.m. I heard raised voices next door. Not screaming, but a man's voice, low and hard, and hers, quieter, pleading in tone, even though I couldn't make out words. I got up again, this time going to my door and looking through the peephole toward 212 feet's door, which was just visible at an angle. Nothing. No light under the door. No shadow. No indication anyone was moving around, despite what I was hearing. I called the front desk. The same tired clerk answered, and I told him what I'd been hearing, that it sounded like a domestic situation next door, and maybe someone should check on it. He said he'd send someone up. About 10 minutes later, I heard a knock 2 doors down. Not mine, not 212 feet directly from what I could tell by the sound's location, more like 213 feet, and a muffled exchange I couldn't make out, and then footsteps going back downstairs. I called the desk again, said the noise was still coming from 212, and he said that it shifted from helpful to slightly confused. "Not occupied tonight, ma'am." I told him I could hear people in there right now. I opened my own door and looked, and he was standing in the doorway of 212 with a flashlight, and behind him, I could see into the room in the spill of light from the walkway fixtures. An empty room, bed made, no luggage, no sign of anyone. I told him what I'd heard. The crying, "He's still here," the man's voice, the argument, and he got quiet in that specific way people get when they're deciding whether to tell you something true or something reassuring. He chose reassuring. He said maybe it carried from another room, motel walls being what they are, sound traveling strangely in old buildings, and he'd keep an ear out. I didn't believe him, but I also didn't have anywhere else to go at 3 a.m. in an ice storm, so I thanked him and went back to my room. I didn't sleep again that night. Around 4:15 a.m., the crying started again, exactly the same as before. Quiet, steady, worn down. Except now it was unmistakably coming from an empty room, which somehow made it so much worse than if I'd been wrong about that in the first place. I put earbuds in and played music loud enough to drown it out, and I stayed like that, sitting up, blankets around my shoulders, until the sky started getting light around 7. I checked out early, telling the day clerk, a different woman this time, a shortened version of what happened, mostly because I needed to say it out loud to someone who might actually know something. She didn't seem surprised. She lowered her voice, even though the lobby was empty, and told me that room 212 had a reputation among the staff, that a woman had died there years back. She wasn't sure exactly when, guessed sometime in the 2000s, before she'd started working there, and that the story staff passed around was that it had been a domestic incident, a boyfriend or husband, that it had ended badly, and that the room had been redone more than once since then in an attempt to change its reputation. New carpet, new paint, new furniture, none of which had apparently stopped whatever it was that guests occasionally reported. She said management didn't like staff talking about it, that officially there was no record of anything unusual, that room 212 was simply an underbooked room because it was smaller than the others on that floor, nothing more. She told me this in the tone of someone who didn't fully believe her own explanation, but had decided it was easier to repeat it than to sit with the alternative. I want to be honest about the fact that I never independently verified any of this. I looked, later, for any news coverage of a death at that address, and found nothing conclusive. Old newspaper archives from Tulsa in that era are spotty online, especially for anything that wouldn't have made front-page news, and motels change names and ownership often enough that even if something happened, it might be effectively unsearchable now. I have no proof. I only have what a stranger told me in a lobby at 7 in the morning, and what I heard through a wall in a room that a maintenance man with a flashlight confirmed was empty. What stays with me isn't even the crying, honestly. Because in the moment, half asleep, scared, I assumed she meant the man causing the argument, that he was still in the room with her, a threat, someone I should call for help about. But months later, turning it over in my head on slow nights, I started wondering if she'd meant something else entirely. If "he's still here" wasn't a warning about a man in her room that night, but an answer to a question neither of us had actually asked out loud. An answer about why the crying kept happening, decades on, in a room nobody was supposed to be occupied. I still live in Tulsa. I still drive past that stretch of Southwest Boulevard sometimes for work, though I've never had a reason to stop again, and I've never wanted one. The motel is still there, last I checked. Same name, same 2 stories, same buzzing lot lights. I don't know if room 212 still exists in the same configuration, or if it's been merged with another room, or renumbered, the way places sometimes quietly do with rooms they'd rather guests stop asking about. I've thought about calling to ask. I've never actually done it, because some part of me is afraid that if I ask and they tell me the room's been gone for years, I'll have to sit with the fact that I heard something crying and pleading in a space that, by then, wouldn't have even existed to make a sound. That's all 4 stories for tonight. It's something simpler, and honestly a little more unsettling, how ordinary all of it looked right up until it wasn't. A quiet knock, a dragging sound through a wall, a guy standing in a parking lot, not doing anything you could call the police over. Real fear, the kind these people live through, usually doesn't come with a warning. It just walks in wearing something completely normal. None of these 4 ever got a clean explanation, and I think that's the part that stays with people longer than any jump scare could. A receipt from a gas station nobody remembers stopping at. A note with a sentence that shouldn't make sense. A room that was supposedly empty. Small things. The kind of details that don't resolve into anything. And just sit there, unanswered, the way they did for the people who lived them. If you've ever had your own night like this, a motel, a knock that came at the wrong hour, a feeling you couldn't shake even after the sun came up, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and some of the best stories on this channel started exactly that way. Someone typing out a memory they'd never told anyone before. If this video kept you up a little, do me a favor and hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who's about to take a road trip they probably shouldn't. It genuinely helps this channel keep going. And it means I get to keep bringing you stories like these. Thanks for staying up with me tonight. Lock your door twice, check the window latch, and if anyone knocks after 2 a.m. claiming to be housekeeping, don't answer. I'll see you in the next one.